I am Bob Richard. I grew up on Charter Street in Newburyport. My mother's family goes back to 1635, Newbury first settlers. My dad's family is French-Canadian. And I'm one of four. I have two brothers and a sister. And my grandparents lived on the same street as I. A lot of interaction with cousins. My dad's was a big family. My mother's was a smaller family. I went to the French school in Newburyport and the French church as well. It was an important part of my life. It was a very small school. There were only 8 students in my graduating class. Well, the French came in the 1880s, and they used to go to Immaculate Conception, but the language was a problem. So they wanted to start their own parish. So they started it, and they built the church in 1902, and subsequently the school as well. And we had the Sisters of Joan of Arc. They were a Canadian religious order, and they came down from Ottawa. I was 5. I didn't go to kindergarten. They put me right into first grade, and the classes were very small, and the classes used to be mixed. They'd have first and second grade in one large room, and they would, and the subsequent grades as well, and they would start lecturing to one grade while the other grade was doing an assignment. That there were probably 30 in both grades. And our classes were taught exclusively in French in the morning, and in the afternoon the classes were English. And we were asked to be altar boys, my brothers and I. We had to learn the prayers in French and also the prayers in Latin. Well, the French school closed in 1963, and the French church, I think around the year 2000, the French church closed because the archdiocese wanted to consolidate parishes. There were too many small churches. The French masses stopped probably in the 60s, and it became all English. Actually, there was 3 generations of us that went to the French school. My dad, me, my brothers, sister, and then the school closed, but my son and daughter went to Sunday school at the French school. And actually my son became an organist through the French school. He was a young boy, and I used to sing in the choir, and he used to watch the organist play, and he'd come home and replicate what she played on the organ. He was a very young boy.
That's awesome.
And the organist became sick when he was about 8 years old, and they needed someone to play the Mass and to accompany the choir, and my son did it at 8 years old. And he did a great job. And subsequently, he's the organist at Immaculate Conception Church, as well as the other job.
So it was a big part of your life.
A big part of our life, yeah. My mother was not Catholic, but when they got married, they could only be married in the rectory of the church. They could not be married in the church because my mother was not of the faith. But she had to promise that she would raise us as Catholics. And she was the one that made sure that we went to church and went to the French school. My father wanted us to go to the French school. But it was not her faith, but I credit her with following through. We had our neighborhood friends that we used to play on the street. We used to play yard games, street games. There wasn't much traffic at the time. And we also, after school, we used to change into our play clothes, and we'd go back to the French school and would play with our French school friends. And I had one pair of friends, their name was Richard as well, Peter and Paul Richard on Federal Street. They lived on the other side, a double house. The grandparents lived on the other side, and they spoke exclusively French. And there was only a telephone on the grandfather's side. So when we wanted to talk to Peter and Paul, we would call the grandfather and tell him in French we wanted to talk to Peter or Paul. And they would rap on the pipe in the kitchen, and sound would go through the other side of the house, and Peter would come over and answer the phone.
Was there a big French community in Newburyport at one point in time?
I don't think it was a big community. They were mostly centered around Federal Street, Beck Street, Middle Street. Of course, my grandparents were on Charter Street, and it was the social life for the French people.
Yeah. So that makes sense. So then it just kind of so eventually it just kind of dwindled a little bit, and then they just merged when the churches wanted to merge in 2000.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I say, my dad's family was a large family, and a French tradition was that it would be a New Year's celebration every year, and the family would get together on Charter Street, and the house would be full of aunts, uncles, cousins, children, and a lot of food, and a lot of good times. I have a picture of that right here. This is part of the family reunion back in the 40s, and I'm in there, my mother and aunts, uncles, cousins, and this was a yearly event. And actually, my cousin carries this on to this time.
That's awesome. Cool.
And I'll show you a picture of the French school. This is the French school, the small building that we went to school in. This is on Federal Street in Newburyport. There used to be a skating rink there, and we used to skate in the winter, and the nuns used to don skates, and they would come out and skate with us. It was really thrilling to see the nuns in their habits skating, and the habit floating in the back, and all you could see was 2 feet wiggling on the bottom.
So you didn't go did you go to Newburyport High?
Went to Newburyport High afterwards, yeah, and it was quite a transition, because the small we were used to the small French school, and only for the most part associated with French school kids. And we got to high school, and I was somewhat overwhelmed. It took me about 6 or 8 months to adjust. There were actually kids that lived in the north end of the city, because we were assimilated only in the south end. A lot of times, people from State Street down, it was called the south end, and we weren't allowed to go up to the north end. I don't know why. There was just this imaginary line.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the kids more or less played on the south end, and the north enders, we just didn't know anything about them until we got to high school.
That's funny.
And they were great kids. It was a great experience after I got adjusted.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
But I didn't have much chance to be involved in extracurricular activities, because I worked after high school. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What else was a big part of your life kind of growing up? What can you remember, you know?
Friends, family, cousins, a lot of interaction with cousins, cars. My dad was an auto repair mechanic. He had his own garage. And when we got into high school, my father didn't want us hanging out downtown. A lot of the kids used to hang out downtown. And he says, you guys are not going to hang out downtown. You guys are going to come to work for me. So after high school, we used to go down to the garage and learn the automotive trade, my brothers and I. My dad started the business in 1937. And so we worked there, and then my brother and I took it over in 1974. And I worked, and then my brother got ill, and he left after about 5 years. I ran it until the end of 2002, and I retired at 60. And so I had put in 45 years into the trade. We did general repairs at first, and then in the 60s we started doing front-end alignments exclusively and brake work.
And it's kind of in a spot that it's pretty familiar to a lot of people from the area, not just Newburyport. Where is it located?
It's right at the driveway as you go down to Michael's. It's the first building. It's the building on the right as you go. You have to go by it to get down to Michael's. My first car, we went to the junkyard and picked out a car, paid $65 for a 1929 Model A Ford, and we wanted to restore it. So my brothers, my dad, and my cousin we spent about a year restoring it, and I kept it until about 1965, and then I sold it because I wasn't using it. And in 1970, I met my wife, and we got married in 1973. She used to work for Toll Silversmith. She was a friend of my sister's. And we've been married for 41 years. We have 2 children. I'll show you the family picture. It's my son Tim, my daughter Sarah, my wife Cheryl, and I. And that was taken maybe 2010 approximately. Oh, this is our wedding picture. It's my mom and dad, Cheryl and I. My dad's name was Benny, my mother's name was Gert. And my dad was synonymous with old cars. He had many old cars. He restored many of them. I don't know if this is the house where I grew up on Charter Street. Number 22, it sits in the back on the right. It's recently been restored. And this is the garage property. My dad bought it in 1941. No, I think he bought it in 45. We lived right downtown, so we spent a lot of time downtown. You could go downtown and you could buy anything you needed to run your household. You had your hardware stores, you had your grocery stores, you had your clothing stores, you had your toy stores, the banks, of course. And the wharf was in pretty tough shape down by the garage. A lot of the derelicts used to live there.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yeah, actually we had cars along the side of the garage. Derelicts used to sleep in the cars.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
There's a guy that I've talked to a couple people, and they seem to remember who he was. He was a guy that used to, I can't think of his name, but he used to always wear a captain's hat.
Yeah, that was Duncan Chase.
Duncan Chase.
Yeah. Well, he didn't hang out in that area. He was more of a downtowner. Downtown is very enjoyable. It's much more enjoyable than it used to be. I think it was more useful to us growing up because there was everything that you needed down there. And today the shops are different. They're more or less tourist oriented. It is interesting. There wasn't as much activity in the north end of the city up to its Story Avenue in the time. Everything was downtown, but now everything seems to have shifted to the items that you need. Your groceries are up that end of the city, and downtown is more or less tourist oriented. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's very nice, and I'm quite proud of what has happened to the city, mostly for the better.
Mm-hmm. So what are some things you used to do growing up?
Growing up, oh geez. We used to collect stamps. We were in the Boy Scouts that got us collecting stamps. We used to play sports. We used to go back to the French school after school and we'd play baseball or football. I was never a good athlete, but I was always encouraged by my peers. Never put down because I wasn't so good. I remember we used to buck up the bat to see who was going to be teammates, and I was usually the last one. But once in a while I'd do something right and I'd get congratulated for it. The kids were good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And we used to build go-karts. There was a barn on Charter Street. The Wheelers across the street used to have a barn. We put on a play, and sometimes we'd put plays on. And then just before the play, we'd get in a fight with the girls, and we'd quit. We used to play hide and seek, relievo, stickball out in the street.
So the dynamic is like changed, like what you used to do then compared to what kids do now. It's different, used to. As I've been talking to people, it seems like parents always just say, all right, go outside and, make your own fun kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what it was. We used to play a lot in the yard, in the neighbors' yards. We were in and out of each other's houses, and it was, most of the mothers stayed home at the time, and it was really nice. But I remember when we got our first television in 1947, it was a little 10-inch screen. And I think we were the first ones in the neighborhood to get the television. We used to have, television didn't come on till about 5 o'clock. There used to be a test pattern on the screen. And Howdy Doody was big in those days. And our house was full of neighborhood kids.
I'm sure.
Looking at that test pattern, wait for Howdy Doody come on at 5 o'clock.
That's awesome.
Yeah, in the whole living room. My mother just loved it, having all the kids there.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's really cool.
And
One second, let me just fix this.
I remember when this is in '47, I was 5, I remember my dad saying, we're going to get a television. I says, what does that mean, Dad? Is it like having the movies in your house? I can remember asking him that question. And then when the television came, the only one that was allowed to touch it was my brother, because he was older. And because years ago with television, you used to fiddle with it a lot because the screen used to flip.
Yeah.
The controls didn't stay into place. Well, not old enough to actually remember the war, but I can remember having condensed milk at home, and I can remember because of the sugar shortage, and I can remember having margarine. My mother would put a tablet in it to make it yellow because there was a shortage of butter. And I can remember the toys after World War II. They were worse than what the Chinese toys are now. And I can remember having a little Jeep, and I looked inside the Jeep, and I could see it was made out of a Schlitz beer can, and it was made in occupied Japan. I can remember the Korean War. I can remember there would be these stars in the windows, and I guess it was I think it was probably a family that had lost a serviceman. And then the Vietnam War.
So let's talk about, do you remember the death of JFK, or do you remember anything from it?
Yeah, I was working at the garage, and somebody came in the garage and told me that JFK had died. And geez, I thought, what's going to happen to this country now? I mean, JFK was so popular, and he seemed to have everything in control. And I remember watching television for 3 days, and I actually recorded the event on my old tape recorder. It was just such a sad time. And then there was the assassination on television of Jack Ruby. We witnessed it live. It was incredible. And the country got through that, but it was tough times. Yeah, people were they felt really close to John F. Kennedy, especially in this area because he was a Massachusetts boy. I used to do a lot of reading. I like historical, factual accounts, and even to this day, I just love to sit down with a good book. I just read a book last week about the horrors of Andersonville Civil War prison. It was it really brought a lot of the conditions to light for me. And what else did I read? Chief Justice Sotomayor's book. It was a compelling story. I just love to curl up with a book and read. I mean, sometimes I'll sit in the room with my wife and she'll watch television, but I don't find television today that entertaining, so I'll just sit next to her and read my book.
That's cool.
Reading's a big, important part of my life. My cousin and I started doing the Richard genealogy, and he is a Capuchin missionary, and he's in Honduras, and he's a year or two older than I. And we went to the American Canadian Genealogical Society to research the Richards, and after we did that, I started getting involved in my mother's side. My mother always said I'm just a Yankee, but I started researching her family, and I didn't realize that we went back to 1635, first settlers of Newbury, and it was very, very interesting. Civil War veterans, Revolutionary War veterans, and I was just completely absorbed in it.
So what was her maiden name?
Her maiden name was Fowler, but there are Kents and Goulds and I would say there's a list of about 110 people that were first settlers in Newbury, and I think we have maybe 40 grandparents through that tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So that sparked your interest in being here. So what do you do now here at the library?
Well, I've been volunteering here since I retired. I've been volunteering here for 10 or 11 years and help patrons with their research. I volunteer on Thursdays, and we're organizing a few things like here. Oh, I shouldn't.
You're good.
Yeah, here are some City of Newburyport School Committee registers that were sent up from City Hall. They're cleaning out their basement. And I'm in the process of cataloging them and inventorying them, and we're going to find a place to put them, and we need to organize them. But there are report cards from 1843, Putnam Free School, Newburyport High School report cards, 1892.
Wow.
It's incredible, and there are attendance records, Jackman's, various schools in the city. So it's a great collection. Well, when I was probably old enough to get out and about, we used to do errands for neighbors. They would give us maybe a dime to go to the store to pick up a few groceries and go to the bank, do whatever. And then as I got into the 8th grade, I started working in people's gardens and helping the weeding and the planting and stuff like that. So that gave us maybe a few bucks at the end of the week. And then of course we worked at the garage.
Yeah. Jimmy McGuire was telling me about how he used to get ragweed from down the river, and they used to pay him 10 cents. You know, they used to make some money doing ragweed or working at the farm where Spencer Pierce Little Farm is today, mopping floors and stuff. And 10 cents would get you into the movies. And he said that was a big thing back in the day growing up.
Yeah. We used to the three of us used to go into the movies for $1. We'd have enough each for a candy bar too. And getting back to work, Dick Walsh, who used to run a spinach farm down Newbury, used to pick us kids up at the French school, and we'd go up there. He'd drive us up to the farm, and we'd pick spinach, and we'd put them in buckets, and they'd weigh them. We got 10 cents a pound or something like that. But I know some kids used to put rocks in there to weigh down the baskets.
Yeah, I've heard some about Dick. Jimmy was talking about Dick Walsh and how he had a big part, did a lot over there at that farm and things like that.
Yeah, he did. It was another way for us kids to make a few cents.
Yeah.